Inside a Seoul appliance store in the mid-2010s, a customer stood before a wall of premium rice cookers. On one side sat a sleek, matte black machine. It featured a digital touchscreen, an infrared sensor, and a multi-layered iron pot designed to replicate a traditional cast-iron cauldron. Built in a specialized factory in Cheonan, it was an engineering marvel, manufactured by a brand named Cuchen. The customer admired the design. They touched the heavy lid. They listened to the representative explain the induction heating technology. And then, they turned slightly, picked up a box from the rival brand Cuckoo, and walked to the cash register. For the engineers and assembly workers behind Cuchen, this was not an isolated retail moment. It was a permanent industrial reality. Cuchen had the capital and the talent to build the most advanced cooking appliances on Earth, yet they were trapped. But the real story of Cuchen is not simply the story of a company losing a market share war. It is the story of how manufacturing and consumer trust interact, and what happens when a factory builds a flawless machine, but a culture has already given its heart to someone else. Every week, we reconstruct the stories behind the appliances, factories, engineers, repair shops, and family routines that quietly shaped everyday life. Subscribe if those forgotten industrial memories still matter to you. To understand why South Korean appliance companies spent decades locked in an engineering arms race, you have to look at the physical object they were trying to replace. Long before the widespread electrification of the Korean kitchen, households relied on the gamasot. This was a heavy cast-iron cauldron built directly into a traditional wood or coal-fired furnace. The gamasot was not merely a pot, it was a high-pressure cooking system. The massive weight of the cast-iron lid trapped steam inside the vessel, naturally raising the internal pressure and driving intense heat deep into the core of each grain of rice. The result was a distinct texture, sticky, glossy, slightly sweet, and perfectly cooked. When electric rice cookers first arrived from Japan in the mid-20th century, they offered tremendous convenience. Families no longer had to watch a fire before sunrise. But those early mechanical cookers operated at standard atmospheric pressure. They simply boiled water until it evaporated, triggering a thermostat to cut the heat. For many South Korean households, the convenience was welcome, but the physical texture of the rice felt incomplete. It lacked the density and elasticity created by the heavy lid of the gamasot. By the 1980s and 1990s, the South Korean appliance market was dominated by massive electronics conglomerates, the chaebols. Brands like Samsung and LG controlled the retail shelves and family kitchens. But these electronics giants rarely engineered their own small appliances from scratch. Instead, they relied on a hidden network of highly skilled original equipment manufacturers, or OEMs. One of the most capable of these hidden manufacturers was a company named Bubang. Operating quietly in the background, Bubang's engineers and assembly workers designed and built the internal heating plates, the thermostats, and the mechanical switches that carried the logos of South Korea's most famous corporations. The consumers who trusted their Samsung or LG rice cookers rarely knew that Bubang factories had actually manufactured them. The system seemed perfectly stable. The chaebols managed the marketing and distribution, while companies like Bubang managed the physical reality of the assembly line. Then in 1997, the Asian financial crisis struck. The economic shockwave forced the massive conglomerates to rapidly restructure. Facing immense financial pressure, Samsung and LG abruptly abandoned the low-margin, small appliance sector to focus on semiconductors and mobile phones. Virtually overnight, the domestic rice cooker market was left completely empty. The famous logos disappeared from the shelves. For the anonymous OEM factories, this was a moment of absolute panic. Without the chaebols to buy their products, the assembly lines had no purpose. The hidden manufacturers had only two choices. They could close their factories and dismiss their workers, or they could finally step out of the shadows, print their own names on the boxes, and attempt to win the trust of the South Korean family directly. The chaebols had left a massive retail vacuum, but filling it would require more than just a standard heating plate. It would require solving the physical problem of the gamasot. When the major electronics corporations retreated, a former OEM manufacturer named Sunkwang Electronics moved quickly, launching its own independent brand called Cuckoo. By engineering a reliable electric pressure cooker, Cuckoo rapidly captured the loyalty of the South Korean public. Bubang, the other major surviving OEM manufacturer, also launched an independent brand named Liham, but Bubang found itself trailing. At the same time, another massive conglomerate, the Wongjin Group, saw the lucrative potential of the empty market. In 2004, Wongjin launched a premium rice cooker brand called Cuchen. They poured immense capital into sleek designs and aggressive marketing, aiming directly at Cuckoo's rising dominance. For a few years, the market fractured. Cuckoo held the lead, while Bubang's Lihom and Wongjin's Cuchen fought bitterly for second place. Both companies realized that fighting each other only strengthened the market leader. In 2009, a major industrial consolidation changed the landscape. Bubang, possessing deep manufacturing expertise and established assembly lines, acquired Wongjin Cuchen. The merger created a formidable new entity. For a time, the combined company operated under the awkward name Liham Cuchen, a branding confusion that subtly weakened their position against a rival with a simple, catchy name. They eventually streamlined it to simply Cuchen. Now, the engineering veterans from the old anonymous OEM era were armed with a recognized premium brand name and a clear mandate: build a machine capable of breaking the monopoly. The breakthrough relied on a fundamental shift in kitchen technology. For decades, rice cookers had relied on a simple metal heating plate at the bottom of the external machine. The plate grew hot, transferring thermal energy upward into the thin metal pot. It was effective, but it was slow, and the heat was uneven. The bottom often burned while the top merely simmered. Cuchen's engineers aggressively adopted induction heating, or IH. Instead of a hot plate, an IH system used copper coils wrapped around the base and sides of the internal chamber. When alternating electrical current passed through the coils, it created a rapidly fluctuating magnetic field. This field penetrated the metal of the inner pot, causing the pot itself to generate heat instantly and evenly from all sides. But IH technology alone was not enough. To truly replicate the gamma sot, Cuchen had to master high-pressure sealing. They designed thick, heavy inner pots using layers of iron, aluminum, and specialized non-stick coatings. When a customer lifted a Cuchen inner pot out of the machine to wash it, they immediately felt the physical weight of the engineering. It felt substantial. It felt expensive. At the top of the machine, a thick rubber gasket, known as the packing, sealed the lid perfectly. As the IH coils blasted heat into the iron pot, the trapped steam raised the internal pressure far above normal atmospheric levels. At the precise moment dictated by a microcomputer, a heavy steel valve on the lid would spin rapidly, releasing a violent plume of steam with a loud rhythmic hissing sound. The rice that emerged was dense, sticky, and glossy. Retailers noticed the quality. Appliance shops began placing Cuchen models directly next to Cuckoo on the premier display tables. The Cheonan factory lines expanded. The company had successfully transitioned from an anonymous parts supplier to a premium brand recognized in homes across the country. They had the technology, they had the factory, they had the perfect product. But they were about to discover that engineering alone cannot overwrite human habit. By the early 2010s, Cuchen had firmly established itself as the undisputed luxury alternative in the South Korean appliance market. This was an era of intense, uncompromised kitchen engineering. The domestic electric rice cooker had evolved from a simple mechanical heating pot into a highly sophisticated, pressurized kitchen computer. Inside the Cuchen manufacturing facility in Cheonan, workers assembled machines that looked more like premium audio equipment than traditional cooking appliances. The factory floors were dedicated to perfecting high-end exteriors, featuring brushed stainless steel, matte black finishes, and metallic rose gold accents. Physical buttons were systematically replaced by seamless glass touch panels. Cuchen was not merely building a tool to boil grains, they were engineering a modern centerpiece for the urban apartment. The physical interaction between the machine and the family became deeply sensory. When a user closed the heavy lid of a premium Cuchen model, they had to turn a thick, mechanical locking handle located at the top. The lock engaged with a solid, reassuring click, physically securing the pressure chamber. It felt safe. It felt substantial. Then came the voice. Cuchen integrated advanced voice navigation systems into their premium lines. When the glass touchscreen was pressed, A calm, digitally refined voice announced the selected setting. Starting white rice cooking? The sound of the Cuchen voice prompt echoing through a quiet apartment in the late afternoon became a defining auditory memory for many households. It was a digital signal that the evening routine had begun and that dinner would soon be ready. To break the market leader's grip, Cuchen relied on relentless innovation. They introduced infrared, or IR, sensors that monitored the precise temperature of the rice from above, rather than just measuring the heat at the bottom of the inner pot. They developed auto-sterilization programs that pushed boiling steam through the pressure valves to keep the internal pathways perfectly clean. They also launched massive marketing campaigns to redefine consumer trust. Cuchen hired South Korea's most prominent celebrities, including top-tier actors like Jang Dong-gun and Song Joong-ki, to appear in high-budget television advertisements. In these commercials, the rice cooker was not presented merely as a utilitarian device. It was framed as an object of desire, an essential component of a sophisticated lifestyle. For the families who purchased them, a high-end Cuchen cooker became a point of domestic pride. Surviving photographs from this period often show the sleek machines positioned prominently on kitchen countertops, their digital clocks glowing in the background of family dinners. The thick, multi-layered iron inner pots endured thousands of washing cycles. When the steam eventually began to leak after years of intense, pressurized heat, the thick rubber packing gaskets were carefully replaced by traveling repair technicians, or new seals were purchased at local service centers to keep the machines running. Families did not discard these expensive machines. They maintained them. The fierce competition between Cuchen and its primary rival, Cuckoo, created a golden age for consumers. Because the two companies were locked in a bitter battle for the premier retail space, kitchen technology progressed at an astonishing speed. This rivalry was essential. If Cuchen had simply surrendered during these years, the South Korean premium appliance market would have become an absolute monopoly. Without Cuchen aggressively pushing the boundaries of aesthetics, induction heating, and sensor technology, the relentless engineering arms race that made Korean pressure cookers the most advanced in the world would have simply stopped. Industry estimates during this period confirmed Cuchen was manufacturing some of the most sophisticated kitchen computers ever designed. They had secured a solid market presence, capturing roughly 30% of the domestic landscape. The Cheonan factories were running at full capacity. The brand was widely respected, and the machines rarely failed. They had the perfect technology. They had the capital. They had the manufacturing power. But behind the polished glass displays, the retail data was hiding a psychological, invisible wall. A brand's decline does not always begin with a failing product, a sudden bankruptcy, or a quiet factory closure. Sometimes it begins with a slow, difficult realization that no amount of engineering can change a culture's mind. Despite millions of dollars spent on research, development, and aggressive celebrity marketing, Cuchen's executives found themselves staring at a retail data line that flatly refused to move. By the mid-2010s, their market share remained permanently frozen at roughly 30%. The first crack in their ambition to dominate the South Korean kitchen appeared not in the Cheonan factory, but in the appliance stores across Seoul, Busan, and Incheon. Retail workers noticed a persistent, almost unconscious pattern. A customer would walk into the store, approach the brightly lit Cuchen display, and admire the sleek, matte black appliances. They would test the heavy mechanical locking handle. They would acknowledge that the infrared sensors were advanced and the design was undeniably superior. And then, driven by an ingrained psychological habit, they would step to the adjacent display, pick up a box from the rival brand, and walk to the register. The problem was not the physical hardware. The problem was language. Over the previous decade, the rival brand name had achieved a rare, powerful status. It had become a generic trademark in the public consciousness. Just as international consumers often asked for a Kleenex instead of a tissue, many South Korean shoppers mentally equated the specific word cuckoo with the general concept of electric pressure rice cooker. When a newly married couple went shopping to furnish their first apartment, parents and grandparents instinctively advised them to buy the market leader. It was perceived as the safe, default choice. Cuchen was widely recognized as a premium, high-quality manufacturer, but choosing it required the consumer to actively break away from a generational tradition. Breaking that kind of deeply rooted cultural habit requires an overwhelming, undeniable technological advantage. But Cuchen soon discovered a frustrating reality regarding the physics of cooking rice. There is a hard limit to how much intense heat and extreme pressure can actually improve a grain. By the late 2010s, the hardware architecture of the premium rice cooker had reached a physical plateau. Both Cuchen and its primary rival had pushed induction heating coils and heavy iron inner pots to their absolute physical limits. The rice produced by a top-tier Cuchen and a top-tier competitor was virtually indistinguishable, even to culinary experts. Desperate to differentiate their machines on the retail shelf, both brands fell into the trap of software feature creep. They added more complex cooking modes, wireless connectivity, and elaborate voice navigation settings. But families did not want a smart computer. They simply wanted dinner. The addition of complex software did not change the fundamental texture of the rice. It only raised the cost of manufacturing. It added fragile digital sensors that eventually required specialized repair technicians, complicating the reliable domestic machine. At the same time, a much larger demographic shift was reshaping the South Korean market. The traditional four-person household was slowly disappearing, replaced by a surge in single-person apartments and smaller families. Furthermore, the national per capita consumption of rice was dropping rapidly. Younger generations were adopting highly diverse diets, relying increasingly on bread, noodles, and ready-to-eat convenience meals. The core market for massive, expensive 10-cup high-pressure rice cookers was steadily shrinking. Faced with an immovable competitor, a physical engineering plateau, and a shrinking customer base, Cuchen's corporate leadership had to make a crucial decision. They could continue pouring vast amounts of capital into marketing, desperately fighting an exhausting war for a few percentage points of market share they would likely never win. Or they could accept their position as a highly profitable, deeply respected number two, and use their specialized manufacturing expertise to survive elsewhere. Cuchen chose transformation. The company began a quiet, strategic pivot. They looked at the core engineering disciplines they had perfected on the rice cooker assembly lines: precise heat management, induction heating, and high-pressure sterilization, and applied them to new household problems. Leveraging their mastery of magnetic coils, Cuchen expanded aggressively into premium induction cooktops, replacing traditional gas stoves in modern high-rise apartments. Because they intimately understood how to control boiling steam and maintain sterile environments, they entered the baby care appliance market. They engineered automated bottle sterilizers and precise formula dispensers. These new product lines required the exact same internal components and engineering knowledge that had been developed for their flagship rice cookers. The transition fundamentally changed the identity of the company. On the retail shelves, the physical space dedicated strictly to Cuchen rice cookers grew slightly smaller, making room for their induction ranges and infant products. The massive marketing budget for the rice cooker division was carefully rationalized. The relentless, exhausting corporate pressure to unseat the market leader was finally released. The company did not collapse. The brand did not disappear. The Cheonan factory continued to operate. The assembly workers stayed on the line. The internal heating plates remained excellent. The repair networks continued to stock replacement rubber gaskets, thermal fuses, and heavy inner pots. But the dream of total market dominance was quietly packed away. The company survived by admitting it could not win. The brand diversified. The logo remained trusted. The machines still cooked flawlessly. The war simply ended. Today, Cuchen remains a vital part of the South Korean appliance landscape. The company did not collapse into bankruptcy, and its physical manufacturing did not disappear. Instead, it successfully transformed from a business defined entirely by an unwinnable market share rivalry into a diversified, highly specialized kitchen technology brand. The corporate structure, now operating as Cuchen Kumainras Lonadi under the Bubong Group, remains financially stable and strategically focused. Most importantly, the historic Cheonan factory still stands. Inside, assembly workers continue to manufacture premium induction heating pressure rice cookers alongside modern induction ranges. The company still designs its own internal heating systems, engineers its own software, and controls its own domestic manufacturing for its high-end lines. In an era where many historic appliance brands have quietly licensed their trademarks to anonymous overseas factories, Cuchen's ongoing commitment to internal physical engineering remains a rare industrial achievement. For the consumers who own them, the legacy of the brand is not about market dominance. It is about physical reliability. In online repair forums and domestic appliance communities, long-term owners frequently discuss the extraordinary durability of the machines built during the intense engineering wars of the mid-2010s. The thick, multi-layered iron inner pots, though deeply scratched and worn from thousands of wash cycles, simply refuse to break. Modern smart kitchen systems offer endless digital connectivity, but they cannot easily replicate the sheer mechanical reassurance of those over-engineered pressure chambers. The story of Cuchen proves a vital industrial truth. A company does not have to achieve a total retail monopoly to create an object of lasting value. By fighting an impossible battle against an immovable cultural habit, Cuchen's engineers inadvertently built appliances so robust that they outlasted the aggressive corporate strategy that created them. In thousands of kitchens across the country, those original machines remain securely on the countertop. The glass touch panel may be slightly faded from years of daily use. The matte black exterior might finally show the minor scratches and wear of family life. But when the heavy lid is pressed down and the thick handle is turned, the mechanical lock engages with a solid, reassuring click. The copper induction coils ignite beneath the iron pot. The thick rubber gasket perfectly seals the chamber. And right on schedule, the heavy steel valve begins to spin, releasing a rhythmic plume of boiling steam into the quiet evening air, keeping a physical promise made by an assembly line years ago. See you in the next video.